Well, it's finally here, the brand new Dell XPS 13. And it's an XPS unlike any that have come before it, for better or for worse. This is Luke with Digital Trends, and I was looking back at the comments for the XPS 13 Plus review from a couple of months ago. And as expected, the reaction to that controversial laptop was either people fawning over the sleek design or pure outrage at some of the more controversial elements. With that in mind, I had some big expectations coming into the review of this, the new standard XPS 13. Before we get there though, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Let's get to it. So it's been a weird year for the Dell XPS 13. For the first time, it's been split into two different lines. Like I mentioned, the XPS 13 Plus and this, the new standard XPS 13. The starting config for this one is $400 cheaper than that Plus model. And since these are both 13-inch devices, Dell is having to somehow distinguish between the two beyond price, which we'll get to later when we talk about performance. But just taking a look at this new design, there's a few notable changes from previous generations of the XPS 13. Like the Plus model, this one is all aluminum now, so no more carbon fiber weave in the palm rests, which also means no more white option, which I'm definitely going to miss. Now, it's just the lighter sky color, which is the one I have, or the darker umber model. These aren't standard silver and black though, which I do appreciate. The sky color is interesting too, since now the keycaps are a slightly different color, and it all comes together in a really nice, unique color scheme. The super thin bezels are still here, of course, and with it, a very mediocre 720p webcam, some very bland speakers, and a bright, impressive screen. But none of that has changed this time around. It's all standard fare for the XPS 13. In many ways, on the outside, this is very much the XPS 13 you know and love. So while the Plus model got a lot of the flashier new features, whether that's the haptic trackpad or the edge-to-edge keyboard, when it comes to internals, it was very similar to previous generations of these computers. This one though, could not be more different on the inside. A lot of engineering work has gone into making the Dell XPS 13 thinner. It's now just 0.55 inches thick, which makes it one of the thinnest Windows laptops you can buy. And it really does feel thin to hold. It feels really nice, despite the fact that it's actually only 5% thinner than the previous model. But as I'm sure you know, at this size, with every millimeter shaved off comes a mountain of work behind the scenes. First off, Dell says the motherboard is 1.8 times smaller overall this time around, including the use of a thinner PCB, which is actually now using a tech borrowed from smartphone boards. Dell has found ways to shrink basically every component of this laptop, including the storage and the memory. And without getting into all the details, it's an impressive amount of engineering work that went into this internal redesign. But the result, again, is just a 5% reduction in thickness. But when it comes down to it, the real kicker with the XPS 13 this year is the performance. In attempts to shrink down everything, you get just a single fan, and with it, just a 9-watt processor. This chip comes from Intel's 12th gen U series line, and these chips have just 2 performance cores, which is 4 less than the P series chips, like the one used in the XPS 13 Plus. The main purpose of nerfing the XPS 13 so far, I think, is to distinguish the XPS 13 from the Plus model, which uses a more standard 15-watt processor. And yeah, less power means less performance. And in this case, it's actually quite a bit less. This is one of the worst performing Intel 12th gen laptops I've tested so far. That's across the whole suite, right? Cinebench, Geekbench, PCMark, even Handbrake. It's actually a little bit slower than even last year's 11th gen model. But with a 9-watt processor and only 2 performance cores, it's kind of what you'd expect. Now, I would argue that last year's performance is probably enough, at least for the type of things a laptop like this was designed for, especially since it's the multi-core performance that suffers here the most. But look, when it comes to choosing the processor for a laptop, it's not all about performance actually. And this is where it starts to feel like Dell made the right choice for the XPS 13's chip this year. First off, the XPS 13 handles heat much better than the Plus model. One of my biggest complaints with that laptop was how hot the surface temperatures got, even when running pretty standard applications. The XPS 13 does not have that same problem and actually does a fantastic job of staying both cool and quiet. There's only that one fan and it never gets overly loud. The second benefit is in battery life. This thing lasted well over 13 hours in light web browsing, which is over 5 hours longer than the Plus model. Of course, you have to consider that the XPS 13 isn't sold with that higher resolution OLED screen, unlike the Plus model. But still, the XPS 13 is clearly a much better performer in terms of battery life. Would you trade a few extra hours of battery life for a step down in multi-core performance? I think for most people looking at buying this laptop, the extra battery life is going to be more useful. And lastly, there's the price. Opting for this lower powered chip has allowed Dell to price the XPS 13 very aggressively. The starting configuration, which is the one I'm reviewing, costs just $829. And Dell isn't even really offering higher end configurations, at least not right now. So again, no higher resolution OLED screens or even 2 TB storage options are available at this moment, leaving those only for the Plus model. But in a world where laptops continue to get more expensive, that starting price is a breath of fresh air and significantly undercuts not only many of this laptop's competitors, but also that M1 MacBook Air. That entry-level configuration even comes with 512 gigabytes of storage, meaning it's actually over $400 cheaper than the M1 MacBook Air when configured similarly. All of a sudden, it's a little easier to see why what Dell has done here is actually kind of genius, especially in a world where it's been hard for premium Windows laptops to compete with the value of the MacBook Air. However, there's one decision here that feels like it might just undo all the clever engineering and marketing behind this laptop, and that's the missing headphone jack. Just like the XPS 13 Plus, the standard XPS 13 has said goodbye to the beloved 3.5mm headphone jack, offering you just 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports in exchange. While the decision to cut the headphone jack on the Plus model made some sense, right? It was meant to be a cutting-edge laptop after all. But with the XPS 13, the standard model, I feel like Dell may have taken this a step too far, and that's coming from somebody who thinks it's totally okay for some laptops to be sold without headphone jacks. But on a laptop like the XPS 13, especially at its lower price, it just feels like a compromise that most people won't see the need for. And I'm not sure I do either, even if I still think everyone uses their headphone jack a lot less than they actually think they do. But headphone jack aside, the XPS 13 has never been this affordable, and even if it lacks some performance this year, it's probably a better purchase than the Plus model for most people. On top of that, it makes for a pretty killer alternative to the M1 MacBook Air. Hey, thanks for checking out this video. If you haven't seen my review of the XPS 13 Plus yet, make sure to go ahead and check that out. While you're here, now's your chance to jump down into the comments and let me know what you think of this new Dell XPS 13. And as always, thanks for watching.